we're just zhuzhing, making sure. I just picked up this plant from Lowe's in their garden center. It's an aglaonema, and I really like aglaonema. They're generally pretty easy to care for and pretty low light tolerant. This plant was produced by Costa Farms. It's in their aglaonema collection, the Trending Tropicals collection. I am going to be breaking this plant down into a couple of smaller plants. So a lot of times when we do repots, we think potting into a bigger pot. But something you can consider if your plants are getting too big for the pot that they're in is actually breaking it down into multiple smaller pots that you can spread around to plantify the space even better, or even more. So this plant does have a little bit of damage on it, which is something to be mindful of when you're plant shopping and choosing the right plant for you. But I wasn't too concerned with that, especially knowing that I was going to create this video. So I intentionally actually bought one that has some damage on it so that I can show you how to manicure it up and get it looking its best. First, I'm going to manicure the plant up a little bit, and then I'm going to show you how to remove the soil, break it into separate plants, and then we'll repot it into smaller pots. I'll also show you how to create the perfect soil to keep this plant healthy long term. It looks like my best guess is that Costa Farms did nothing wrong in growing this. Obviously, it's super beautiful, but all of the damage on this plant either happened in transit to the store or while it was in the garden center at the store. So I'm not too concerned with the plant being in bad health by any means. And I have no fear at all that this plant will be thriving immediately. So it probably just needs a little bit of water. It looks like the soil is pretty dry. So we'll get to the bottom of that. First things first, we're gonna take out this little Costa Farms tag and hold on to it maybe for a little bit so that I can remember exactly what aglaonema this is. It doesn't even say. It's going in the trash. If you see one of these white pots from Costa Farms Trending Collection, it is definitely not a pot with a drainage hole. So, one of the things to consider is where you're gonna put this, because this may be a great thing for you. If you want to put this somewhere where there's like electrical cords, or like you don't want the water dripping onto carpet, this pot is going to do fine for you. But if this is somewhere where that isn't an issue necessarily, I would probably change the pot, because if you have too much water in the soil being retained and sitting in this pot, it's going to cause root rot. And for so many of us, watering our plants is the way that we show them love. And sometimes we kill them with kindness. And overwatering is a surefire way to see decline in your plant pretty fast. So I'm going to remove some of these damaged leaves, and then we can talk about what the damage looks like and what it might mean as far as health concerns for the plant. These look... All right. There really isn't too much damage. So on this leaf, it's pretty clear this is just an aesthetic damage. You can see that there's no discoloration past the crispy brown edges of this tear. Like if this was yellow, like brown and then yellow, I would be concerned about root rot. But because it's just nice and crispy on that rip, and then the rest of the leaf is pretty fine, this is probably from unpacking the plants at the store and then putting them on the shelf. And at some point, this is just like a tear. Nothing to worry about. You can remove this leaf if it bothers you. It bothers me, so it came off. But otherwise, not too much issue to worry about there. We do have some pretty discolored leaves here. When they look like this, I like to get as close to the main stem as possible. This could be a couple of things. This color yellow sometimes can be a pretty clear sign of root rot, but not always. You want to look exactly where that leaf is in relation to the other leaves on the plant. If this isn't the oldest leaf, if this is the lowest leaf on the plant, this may just be a leaf that the plant is dropping in order to encourage energy to go to the top of the plant where there's new growth. And in this case, that's exactly what it was. In fact, these were the 2 oldest leaves. And considering that it's near the end of winter, this makes perfect sense chronologically that it's just old leaves and we can get rid of them. So now the more I'm cleaning this plant up, the more I'm gaining even more confidence that this plant really is in good health. It just probably needs some water. Great. So now that I've cleaned up some of these leaves, I can really get a better visualization for how many plants are actually in the pot. Because the cool thing about how these Aglaonema grow is you'll get little, I call them pups or puppies, but little babies that pop up from the soil that are pretty easy to separate, and you can pot them entirely separately if you want to, or leave them in the pot if you want a fuller plant. But I'm going to show you how to break this down. All right, so let's remove the nursery pot from the decorative planter. I like to grab the plant, the Aglaonema, at the base near the soil and pull from there instead of trying to tip it over or anything like that. You can also try to get your finger in underneath the nursery pot and pull it out that way. There we go. Sometimes I'll hold on to these though, even if I'm not necessarily putting plants in them. If I'm not necessarily putting a potted plant in this, they do hold water great and you can propagate in them as well. There's still plenty of uses for this planter. I mean, you paid for it, so we'll hold on to it. And if you're a plant parent, there's probably dirt on your floor. Houseplant potting soil on your floor. One of my tips and tricks for preventing that from happening is I get these kitty litter trays from the dollar store, and they work as the perfect little workstations to kind of contain some of the mess at least. A lot of times when we buy these plants that are in decorative planters like that, we leave them in those decorative planters and then care for them. And even though we've taken all of the advice that we could have collected from the internet, it still seems that the plant declines in health a little bit. And here is my perspective as to why that happens a lot of the times. Plant nurseries are growing in a substrate or soil blend that works perfectly for their grow operation and the species that they're trying to grow and where their greenhouse is located. So a lot of times you have this really moisture retentive substrate, like a peat moss or cocoa coir, or even sometimes sponges that is in the pot that is holding onto that moisture to encourage roots to grow, but it's also in a greenhouse in South Florida, so the moisture is evaporating really quickly. The thing is when it makes it to your house, that's no longer the perfect substrate for the plant's environment. So what happens is it gets to your house, you continue to water it, and the substrate is not drying out fast enough, and you end up getting root rot. So after letting your plant acclimate to your home for 2 weeks or so, it's probably time to change the substrate to something more appropriate to its new environment. So let's do that. I'll take this out of the pot. We'll take a close look at the substrate that they're using to grow this plant. Then we'll build a soil blend that'll work perfect for this long term. Here we go. All right. Cool. So we actually have a couple of plants in here. Don't fear hurting the roots too bad, especially with an Aglaonema like this. It's really easy to kind of separate the substrate from the roots. Just give it light agitation, stick your fingers between the roots, kind of give it a shake. But let me show you something that is going to scare a lot of you if you saw this doing it on your own without seeing the video. And if you hear some tearing, don't worry about it. In fact, it's kind of a good thing, especially if you're doing it as we are going into spring. All it's going to do is give a message to the plant to repair those roots and actually encourage some new growth to form underneath the soil. You can see a lot of the soil has come off, but what is going on here? Let me tell you. So there's quite a bad conversation happening about this on the internet, and why I think people call them death traps or something like that. But if you really think about it, it's just the method that this nursery uses to cultivate this plant, and they grow them in these little mesh pots. The problem is when they're ready to pot into that decorative planter, it is no longer easy or in the plant's best interest to remove it from that. So they plant these beneath the soil and they go hidden for the most part. They can hinder some growth. I mean, they do congest the root system a little bit, but let me show you how to remove them so that you can really free up those roots completely. I'm just gonna use my garden shears, but you can also use like an X-Acto knife or even a pair of scissors. And so if you look at this little mesh pot, it's got spaces between little bars that run up and down. So you want to find the first one and cut it in the middle, and then go to the next one and in the same place cut it. Just being really careful not to cut a root. If you do cut a root, not the end of the world at all. And just go to the middle and cut it. And you're going to work your way around this little pot. So now that we've cut all the way around, this you can gently, oh, I'd missed a couple. Oh shit. All right. There we go. So now that nope, there's still more. One more. All right, there. So now that you've cut all the way around, you've literally got the bottom of the mesh pot that has come off. Kind of loosen this up a little bit, and then just find a spot that has the least amount of roots. Find the top of one of these little drain holes and slide your scissors up in there like that. Oops. And then you can just peel it off and none of your roots go damaged. So these things are not the end of the world. By the nursery leaving them in there, they're actually reducing the labor cost, which I know that's a whole like business part of this, but it's actually keeping the plants at an affordable price if you really think about it. Because if they hired somebody to remove these, you saw how long that took me, 1.5 minutes times, whoa, like can you imagine how many plants like this Costa Farms is producing to put in big box stores? That would just take too long. And this plant, instead of being $19.99, would be $32. Now, when it comes to separating the plant into multiple plants, you can see that happens pretty easily. And they kind of just separate into if they're a completely separate plant, they'll separate just like this. If it's a new growth point on the mother plant, on the mother like stalk, they won't fall off, but you can kind of put your fingers at the very base where it's attached to the main stem and just pull backwards. There you go. I think for this one, since it's still kind of young, I'm going to leave it attached. Why not? Now I'm going to cut the pot off of this one as well, just so that we have all the plants removed and we can move forward with repotting. As you can see, this one actually has a pretty vigorous root system, so it's a little bit more difficult to get in there to cut the pot out, but I'm not worried. We are going to get through it. And I'm going to be covered in dirt by the end of this, that's for sure. There we go. And I'll cut that. And we should be able to just peel it off again. Just like that. See, it's not that scary. It looks more intimidating than it really is. There we go. The further you can get down on the base of the plant where the roots are to pull from, the higher likelihood there will be for you to separate off plants that are connected to the root system. If you pull too high on the plant, you're going to end up breaking the growth from the top, and which isn't the worst thing in the world. You can propagate it, but in order to be able to repot immediately, try to get as low to the roots as you can. I'm just taking these out of my little litter pan here so that we can take a closer look at the soil that was potted in the nursery pot. Now that we can take a closer look at this substrate, it's very clear that they're potting in coco coir. There's also some fertilizer that will release its nutrients into the soil over time. That's what these green little beads are. But otherwise, pretty much coco coir. The good thing about coco coir, super moisture retentive. So it's doing exactly what it needed to for that growing situation. This substrate though, in your home, if you're watering too often, is going to kill your plant pretty fast. Now that we're taking a closer look at this substrate, it's pretty clear they're using 100% coco coir. There are some time-released fertilizer beads in here as well that'll release their nutrients into the soil over time. But the problem with coco coir is it's super moisture retentive, so this is not the ideal substrate for your home. What we do want is something that's a lot more draining, or that allows for the moisture to evaporate much faster. So there's a couple things you can do here. You can start from scratch and make your own soil with your own blend of amendments, or you can start with this as a base. I mean, there's no use in wasting this substrate, so I'm gonna add a couple of amendments to this soil to increase the drainage capabilities and make it perfect for my home. So let's see what we have here. We have perlite. Perlite's a great way to add drainage. Let's add some perlite. Perlite does give off a little bit of toxic dust, so they recommend using a mask when you use it, or like wearing a mask. So we'll just kind of also that was no exact quantity, obviously, so just salt and pepper to taste, you know. So while perlite will help with drainage, it doesn't do anything for the moisture retention part of the equation. So something else that I like to add to the soil that does both things really well is orchid bark. There's a couple of reasons I really like orchid bark. These large, chunky pieces are going to create tons of air pockets in the soil that will prevent the soil from being compacted over time, which can be a huge issue. It's also able to absorb quite a good amount of liquid, but it evaporates super fast. So different from the coco coir that holds onto that liquid forever like a sponge, this actually does a great job of incorporating just the right amount of moisture that the soil needs. So I'm just gonna add another handful. Cool, so we're just gonna give this a little mix now. You just want, is it even homogeneous if it's a whole bunch of different ingredients, especially if you can tell them apart? But that's exactly the thing, is you want to be able to identify the different ingredients in your soil blend, but you want it to be well mixed. You want different textures, different size things in there so that the water drains out drains out adequately. All right, there we go. Let's take a closer look at what the soil looks like now that I've added some amendments and will be the soil that I use to do the repot. You can see it's nice and chunky. There's tons of air involved in between all of the nooks and crannies between the bark, but between the coco coir and the bark, there'll be tons of moisture retention, but the bark and the perlite will allow for adequate drainage. Most of the time when we do repots, we're thinking potting bigger, right? But this is a great opportunity, especially since we've already done the division of the plants, to break it into a couple of plants. You can share plants with your friends. You can make a table centerpiece that requires a couple more plants, or if you just want to add some life to different parts of the room, this is your opportunity. Another great thing about this aglaonema is that it is super low light tolerant, meaning it's really versatile when it comes to where you can place it in your home and still keep it healthy. So this is a plant that, now that we're separating it, you can put it in the kitchen where there's, great light, and in the bedroom where there is okay light, and both plants will do great. So I'm going to start by just putting a handful of dirt in the bottom, maybe 2 handfuls. And then I want to kind of look at the plants that I have available here that we've separated and kind of build what the arrangement is going to look like. So this one's pretty big, so I might pot this one alone. This one also looks good. Oh, we've got quite a couple more here. So maybe this one and this one together. Wait, no. It's gonna take your time with this. Nobody's rushing you. And just kind of group them together so that you have 3 equal looking plants at least. You can try your best to. Yeah. All right, there we go. So you're just gonna drop this plant into the soil, and then cover the roots and kind of stabilize the plant off that way. I like to put one of the plants in first, especially when you have multiple growths into the same pot. I'll put the one in, add some soil to make sure that the roots of that plant are completely encompassed in soil before adding the next plant, so that isn't root to root contact. Kind of tucking roots as you go, making sure the soil's all in the right places. If you give the pot a little shake in between handfuls of dirt, you ensure that the soil's actually making it to the bottom. Sometimes you think you're done, and then you pick up the plant and it falls over because there's an air pocket you don't know about. 1, done. Let's move on. Two. Now we have the last 2 plants to add to the third pot. We'll start the first one, put in some soil. Add the next one. Make sure you like the way it's placed in there, so you have a even looking plant from all angles. There we go. 3. Now I'm going to clean up my workstation so that we can do some plant manicuring and not get soil everywhere, whatever. Who designed this table? There's holes everywhere. It was me. I designed the table. I'm just gonna clean the pots off a little bit. They've got dirt all over them. One important thing to note about these pots is they do have drainage holes in them, which is an important factor of this whole equation. Just like we mentioned earlier about the decorative pot that they came in not having drainage, we want the new pot we're putting them in to have drainage. That way, we're not creating a swamp. We want a nice houseplant. We don't want a stinky swamp. But because they have drainage holes and these are going on a nice shelf in my house, I need to catch the water somehow so it doesn't ruin my rug and get in the plug outlets and stuff, because that would be dangerous. I've got some little saucers that fit on these pots really well. And so what I like to do is give them a good water. Any water that collects in here, I'll dump out. Or you can even bottom water by adding water directly to the saucer. I'm gonna do something that is not required by any means, but just makes me, it's just something I like to do to add some element of personality to the pots. I like to add some moss. I call it a pot topper, and it's like mulching your houseplants. Just so, especially if you have a cat that likes to play in the dirt, this is a great way to just add something a decorative layer that, one, prevents gnats in a big way, but also just looks a little bit more finished, especially if you're using these plants for a centerpiece or something. One thing I will suggest though, is that if you do a pot topper, when you go to rewater, make sure you're passing the pot topper when you're checking to see if your soil is completely dried out, because a lot of times the moss on top sometimes will hold more moisture than the soil really has in it. It also will increase the amount of time it takes the soil to dry out. So just be mindful of that if you decide to put a pot topper on. I'm just gonna tease up the moss a little bit so it doesn't look so from the box. Then as a finishing detail, I like to just get a couple pieces of this orchid bark and kind of scatter it throughout, and it gives that real forest floor vibe. There's no mathematic or scientific way to do this the right way. In fact, if you try to do it the right way, it'll look wrong. So you kind of have to just let your mind go, let Mother Nature take the wheel, and scatter your bark. Maybe one more piece. Perfect. Perfect. Since we've repotted these plants and done a little bit of damage to the roots, I'm gonna add some prop drops. This will encourage new root growth to form and really establish these plants in their new home. When I'm doing a repot like this, I either incorporate this into the soil, into the substrate before I do the repot, or I'll put a couple of drops right at the base of each plant. welcome home. Then I'm going to use Market Botany's Leaf Shine to give these leaves the bath they need. Giving them a light mist all over the foliage. Don't forget the underside of the leaves as well. That's where the pests like to hide, is up under there, up under that leaf. And if you just do some general plant maintenance and upkeep, you'll have a better chance of keeping those pests at bay. And I'm just using a microfiber towel to gently wipe away the cleanser. I like to get all the way down to the petiole too, especially if I can see some stains and dirt. But it's up to your preference on how involved you get. When I did the repot, the substrate was pretty dry, so we are going to give them their first full water in their new pots. We're gonna lay these saucers down to catch any of the water that drains. Just give them a nice water. You want to distribute the water, across the whole pot. And once you start to see water coming out the bottom, you can stop. I'll let these sit here for a little bit so that all of the excess water can drain into the tray in the bottom. Once I know it's been plenty of time, I will take the drip tray and empty it out. We don't want the soil sitting in water. We want it to be able to dry. So that is how you break down one plant and turn it into 3. I think I'm gonna give one of these to my mom. You want one? Yeah, you want one? Yeah, you will take one? Sweet. Did I say I had a purpose for these plants, like a dinner party or something? Okay, because there's no dinner party. Here you go. Here. That's for you. That's Jake. I will see you real soon, because you best believe I'm doing stuff with plants tomorrow too. So, see you tomorrow. Not tomorrow. I won't. Should I not say that? So thank y'all. I will see you later. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you found something valuable from this. Have a good day. Or what do I f***ing say? Well, I hope you enjoyed. I'm gonna go put this somewhere nice. Yeah. I'll see you soon.